Okay, can everyone see? Okay, great. The North Central RISC started in June of 2021 and is funded by the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. The North Central region includes these 7 states shown here, but we coordinate closely with the surrounding states and regions. And in fact, the North Central RISC is based on the very successful model from the Northeast RISC that is now expanded into 4 other regions across the US. One of our overarching goals is to improve management of invasive species in a changing climate, really tackling these 2 issues together. Our objectives for the North Central region are to connect researchers, managers, and other stakeholders, to conduct priority research, including synthesizing existing information, and to ultimately reduce the impacts of invasive species in a changing climate. And some of our specific science objectives for the North Central region include understanding what species and ecosystems are most threatened, going forward, which invasives will be most important to manage in a changing climate, and third, what are the interactions between wildfire, climate, and invasive plants, and what is the potential for ecosystem transformation? We have a great advisory board at the NC RISC that helps guide our activities, providing insight from invasive species and climate change fields and helping us bridge between research and management communities. In the first 10 months of the North Central RISC, we've been working on building out our network by reaching out to stakeholders in the region, including folks from universities, local, state, and federal agencies, tribal nations, and NGOs. We conducted a survey to better understand both the research and management priorities, and we're now writing up a survey report that will summarize these findings. And we'll run through some of the preliminary findings from the survey today. So the goals of this workshop are to build community, including identifying others working on similar problems. These could be future collaborators for you all. To hear about relevant work from both researchers and managers, and to hone in on research and management priorities related to invasive species and climate change. So here's kind of the plan for today. We're here at the beginning learning about a little bit of the background behind the North Central RISC. Coming up, we'll hear an exciting talk on the science behind invasive species and climate change and their interactions. Then we'll have some breakout sessions to really get to know one another and explore some of the priorities for the region. And then lastly, today we'll hear from a few managers in the region to hear about what is working for them, what isn't working, and some lessons learned. So I'm sure you all are familiar with Zoom at this time, but I did want to run through a couple just kind of housekeeping things before we get started. We ask that you keep yourself muted at all times when you're not actively speaking to minimize distractions throughout the day. To answer a question, we ask that you either type it in the chat, you can do this at any time, or you can raise your hand and we'll show you how to do that. And lastly, if it's possible, when we go into the breakout sessions later today, we'd love for you to have your camera on if your bandwidth will permit it, but we realize that that's not always possible for everyone. Okay, so again, a lot of us are pretty familiar with the Zoom at this point, but I did want to point out a few features for you. So on the bottom left-hand side of the toolbar, you'll see these 2 little buttons here where you can mute and unmute yourself, and you can turn your video on and off. If you want to ask a question, you can go over here to the middle portion of that toolbar to the reactions. And if you click on reaction, then there's an option to raise your hand. So again, you can ask a question at any time if you just raise your hand, and we'll answer them in the order that they come in, or you can just put your question in the chat if that's more comfortable for you. Okay, so I think that's all for the housekeeping stuff. Now I'd like to introduce Nicole DeCrappeo, the director of the Northwest and North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, to say a few words about the North Central RISC. Go ahead, Nicole.
Okay, can you hear me okay, Chelsea?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. Happy to be with you this morning. I'm Nicole DeCrappeo. I'm the director for the North Central and the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Centers. And as Chelsea mentioned, the North Central CASC, as we call them, is the funder and supporter of the North Central RISC. So I just wanted to give a few comments or a little bit of an introduction to the CASC network and to the North Central CASC in particular. So I have just a few slides that I will share with you to show you what we're all about. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the Climate Adaptation Science Center network. I mean, we're still the relatively new kid on the block. We really just got started back in 2009 and kind of feel like we're coming into our own at this stage. But we are a Department of the Interior entity, and we're run through the U.S. Geological Survey. We have, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of our full network here. So you can see that we are a federal university partnership. All of the CASCs, we have 9 of them across the country, and we have a federal component, and then we also have a university component. So we're co-located at host universities. And each CASC also consists of a consortium comprised of other university or other institutions in the region. And what we're really trying to do is harness the diverse expertise of federal university, and should say their tribal scientists as well. We're also really committed to capacity building and training in this the kind of work that we do. So here's a map of where we work. Again, we have 9 centers across the country, and we also have a national center back east outside of Washington, D.C. And our mission, the mission kind of broadly of the CASC network, is to deliver science to help fish, wildlife, water, land, and people adapt to a changing climate. So we'll zoom in here a little bit on the North Central region, just to give you a better sense of who we are and what we do and our geographic boundaries. So you see here the footprint of where we work. And then this is I'm showing here is the host university, is University of Colorado at Boulder. And this is our consortium made up of the groups that you see here on the map. The places that we particularly are focused on at this time, you can see on the left, the priority habitats that we work in: freshwater ecosystems, high elevation systems, grasslands, and of course, sagebrush steppe. And some of the biggest management issues that we're grappling with and worried about and thinking about and funding science on is just generally water availability, habitat loss and change, and of course, invasive species and disease, which you'll be hearing quite a bit about today and tomorrow. And then wildfire is also obviously a huge concern for us, as is drought issues. It's another aspect that we think and work a lot on. I'm going to tell you about our vision and the way we try to achieve that vision and the North Central CASC. So you can see here that natural and cultural resource managers use actionable and open data, tools, and innovative science to make climate-informed decisions that support resilient ecosystems. Our approach is all about rooting the science in the management context and in the decision-making space that people are working in. So we always start with the management questions and the management priorities and derive our science and our other activities, our training capacity building activities from there. The desired outcomes from that vision that I just showed you are things of this nature: shared literacy, right? Scientists and managers build shared literacy for culturally appropriate climate adapted resource management. And I'm sharing this with you because this is all very relevant to what we're going to be doing here in this RISC symposium over the next 2 days. And this is a big part of it, is making sure that we're all understanding the language that we're using and just kind of growing in our literacy of this topic together. Secondly, we co-identify needs and solutions to problems. As I mentioned, we're always looking for that context relevant knowledge to apply to management challenges on the ground and the decision-making context. Knowledge production and capacity building. We want to build a strong network of partners that produce open, actionable knowledge and build shared capacity. And finally, translation and application. Climate adapted management of landscapes is understood, applied, supported, and institutionalized. So again, all feeding very directly into what we're doing here the next 2 days with the RISC, with this North Central RISC Symposium. Just so you're aware of kind of how all of the feedback we get from our partners and again, over these next 2 days, that feedback goes into how we do our science planning and our annual, and goes into the priorities we call for in our annual funding opportunities. So we work directly with stakeholders to identify our management needs and ensure that the science can inform real world policy priority decisions, not policy decisions. We engage our partners to develop long-term, generally 5-year science plans, and then we also have these annual funding plans and funding opportunities that not always annual, sometimes every other year, but regular science opportunities to address some of these management priorities. And then we fund those projects that best address the stakeholder or partner needs. We've done a lot of work over the years, kind of starting with, we really were focused in the beginning of the CASC days, early days, with climate downscaling and uncertainty analysis and the kind of very high level physical modeling and hydrologic modeling. But we've moved over the years much more closely into looking at biological impacts and vulnerability of resources to climate change. And now we're very firmly rooted in that last picture and topic at the bottom of the page, the climate adaptation space. And climate adaptation is still a very new kind of science. And so we're really trying to help lead a lot of conversations around what it means to be doing climate adaptation and what successful climate adaptation looks like. So kind of tying it back to the Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change, or RISC network. So as Chelsea already mentioned, the first RISC network was started up by the Northwest CASC in the Northeast region. And they have just done a spectacular job of kind of defining what this thing can look like and the reach that it can have. I encourage you, after I'm finished speaking, I can put some links in the chat, but I encourage you to check out their website. They have a lot of what they call management briefs, and I think Bethany will probably talk about those in just a minute in her presentation coming up. But they have done a spectacular job of really looking at the science and being able to translate that to real world issues and for the managers and partners in their region. It's something that we really want to duplicate in the North Central region. There's also a Northwest RISC, and I don't have them listed here on the slide, but the Pacific Islands RISC network as well. The Northwest, we held I'm also the director for the Northwest, so I sometimes slip into the Northwest, we had a symposium last September, I believe it was, and we had over 500 people register for that symposium. So we know we're hitting a sweet spot here of people's desire to learn about this nexus of climate change and invasive species and how it is we can manage better together with this kind of larger issue that we're all grappling with. The symposium talks from the Northwest RISC are all recorded and available for viewing as well, and I'll put a link to those in the chat when I'm finished speaking. One of the things you'll hear more about tomorrow, but I'm particularly excited about and thinking a lot about is the RAD framework that I'm sure many of you have started to become familiar with or hear about. RAD is an acronym standing for Resist, Accept, and Direct. And I think as many people have been thinking along these lines for a long time, but it's kind of come together in this nice framework in which we're really trying to test in a lot of new ways. And so thinking about resisting change on the landscape, which is to say, doing everything we can to keep things as they currently are. And we see more and more frequently that that is not necessarily a winning strategy, right? So that's something that we're grappling with. Accepting that middle case there, sort of accepting the changes that we see, is another thing that we have to sort of think about and talk about in our communities, and whether or not we're okay with the changes we see on the landscape. But then on the right, we see the direct, the last part of the framework there is directing change. What does it mean really to direct change, and how can we best do that with the kind of science and the knowledge that we have at hand? And that's sort of where we're focused in the CASC network, is thinking about that direct piece of it and how we do that better, or if we should do it at all. So those will be some of the talks you'll see tomorrow, and again, in the context of invasive species management. I think they'll be really interesting to you all, hopefully. So that is all I've got to just kind of orient you to some of the work we do more broadly around the network and in the North Central CASC. And I'm looking forward to the symposium, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was a great introduction.